when it's stopped.
Okay, it is not popping up.
I guess you have that set like extended. Not
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is not my normal machine, so let's figure out how to.
Yeah. So display.
When take your time.
You got
got like
plenty
I made a
Okay.
lot of cushions for take your time.
Oh,
You got at least
okay.
like 10 minutes.
Okay, cool.
Displays, please. Do you want a mirror, basically?
Let's see.
Thanks, Mac OS. Use as hit the. Oh wait, no, sorry. Use as mirror for HDMI splitter.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Great. That all works.
Yep. You got a bit of time.
Cool.
You have plenty of time. Yeah.
Yep. That's why I want to find out. I don't need more time. 10 minutes before I need it.
Early.
Yeah.
Actually, like.
Well, again, this morning I had the adapter problem, so like
Right.
after one single point of failure, I was like, okay, I don't want to. Like, I had enough time at least to like run home and grab a fix. I don't have time for that now. So
So your topic is become unphishable.
yes,
Could you pronounce your last name for me?
sure, Eliason.
Eliason.
Yep.
Brandon Eliason.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
So the way that we have this set up, there's obviously no implication, but the feed does come from here, and that goes into the record.
Okay.
So it's a little bit weird. Like you feel like it's not working, but it actually is.
I think you'll have to overcome the inclination to talk louder.
Yeah, which is okay. I'll basically what we'll do here is I basically monitor levels for the first little bit, make sure everything's kosher.
Okay.
If you need to make an adjustment, I'll flag you and like up or down for like volume.
Okay.
And then once you're good, we'll go from there.
Okay.
And 10, 5, 1.
And roughly, like, what would you say the split is of people that are on headphones, like versus, I guess, headphones?
It's all on
outside
headphones.
there.
99% headphones.
Like, I guess how many are physically here? Like, I'm guessing because of the setup, I should put a little more emphasis on like reading or describing all the visuals because not everyone. Because,
Do your thing. Because if people just listening elsewhere, like that's on that.
Yeah.
okay, and I have no problem doing that. I'll adapt to the audience and whatever's the.
Go this way. You do.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's no. That's probably a good combination, but by no means.
Okay.
Okay, 1 minute. 1 minute.
Great. Let me grab my water.
I know. I tried to. Yeah, I cut the first one short, so we got 10 minutes buffer. So now we're on the schedule. We're good.
Yeah, I say
I
start.
want to make sure you got Q&A.
Start early.
Yeah.
Start on time because there might be people coming to get.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
Start on time.
So 4 minutes.
Sure, great. And then
He's the boss.
So I'm officially taking over for what, Josh?
Josh, yeah.
Okay.
That's why I was saying, where's
Right,
Josh?
yeah, I know.
Where are you from?
University City. So, yeah, just
I see.
very close.
Where you originally from?
California.
California, I see. You have the accent, I can't.
Yeah, West Coast, Northern California.
Yeah, when I was in college, I had a professor who taught literature. She had a French accent, and I asked her, "Where are you from?" She said, "California." I was like, "Where in California?" And she mentioned there's a small area in California somewhere. They are French descendants, so they have the French accent.
Yeah, mostly my area is a little Portuguese, but a lot of just
Portuguese.
old, a lot of
Yeah.
old English, but old English.
Old English, yeah.
It's a very small kind of agricultural town.
I
So a lot of people there. Like I'm fifth generation from that town,
I
so it's
see.
like my people have not strayed from there very often. Hey, where are you from?
I'm from Washington, D.C.
I've had a little bit of trip then.
It's a little bit tripped out. One of the guys is a DEF CON goon, so he
Yeah,
had to
Dave.
go out, Dave
Yeah.
Smith, so
Yeah,
I just come,
Yeah.
A couple of goons are here.
That's my aspiration. So I've still never been to DEF CON. Like every year I try and go, and it's just like it's tough to get the time off.
Your topic is relevant,
Yeah.
and it's fun. It's a fun place to go. Next
Would
time
love to do
thinking
that.
about taking my kids there, because I just met the girl who is going to run the DEF CON kids.
Oh really?
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. Like,
Where's she? is she working or is she just attending?
Her name, yeah, she's working. She has a booth over at the village, and her name's Bianca Louise.
Yeah, I'll have to go see her. I would love to bring my
Romanian.
How old are your kids?
11 and 13. That's another good. That's her. This is her boots. Yep.
I will go say hi to her. Oh, I think I remember the patches, so I will go say hi to her. And my daughter's only 9, so like
Not yet, about the same.
But good, yeah, good.
She say I think age between 9. I want to say I actually looked it up. Just look it up. DEFCON kids. What age is 18?
Fantastic.
Maybe we should link up. Have a trip together.
Yeah.
Okay, we got 1 minute.
We have let's see.
I can go ahead to do my intro. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Track 1. I am your Track 1 host. My name is Angus Chen. I'm very curious about phishing. I got phishing emails all the time. I'm sure you all do. The next speaker is Brendan Eliason. And his topic is about become unphishable. Let's welcome Brendan Eliason.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for showing up. I'm actually not the person you were expecting to see, depending on when you looked at the program, but hopefully you'll find this topic interesting. My name is Brendan Eliason. I do IT security audit and penetration testing for a company called BAI Security out of Chicago, but have a background in behavioral science, kind of psychology, and ultimately teaching and training. So when I kind of got into security, one of the things I found very lacking was respecting the degree of quality of training and effectiveness of training that I would expect to see for things as important as phishing. So this is ultimately how we can use behavioral science and safety science to better understand what we're doing wrong right now, which is most of it, and also get some idea of how we can change so we can actually solve what is probably one of the bigger problems we have in our industry. Despite the fact that anti-phishing training is probably one of the single largest line items on anyone's budget. Certainly collectively as an industry, we spend billions of dollars on human-based risk, and it hasn't really changed much. In fact, if anything, the trends have been going up instead of down over the last 10 or 20 years, and that's really stupid. If you spend that much time and that much money on something, you would hope to see trends going the other way, but there's some very good reasons for why we're not getting the results that we think we should be getting. Now, first of all, could be a very short talk. Want to solve phishing? Always use complex passwords, use a password manager, always use MFA, preferably a hardware token, and fully adopt FIDO2 standards. Done. But since I've got some more time to speak, let's find out why we haven't done those things and what it is that is lacking in terms of what we are actually doing. Again, really, ultimately have just two major problems. What it is we're actually doing and how we go about doing that. So if we solve those two things, we'll be in a much better situation. For starters, God forbid you look at research. But this is a problem that has been actively studied for a long period of time. Sadly, little of the research and the results of the research is incorporated into security and security awareness training programs, but a lot of the research is very good. This is one of the more recent studies, very large study out of Switzerland, studying phishing specifically. And I know for the benefit of everyone that cannot see the graphics, I'll just quote the most important takeaway from this, which is, we find that embedded training during simulated phishing exercises as commonly deployed in the industry today does not make employees more resilient to phishing, but instead it can have an unexpected side effect that can make more employees even more susceptible to phishing. It's corroborated by an older study, but one of the better studies by Angela Sasa and Melanie Volkamer. And their takeaway from that research is the impact of simulated phishing campaigns on employees' self-efficacy and trust in the organization may negatively affect other organizational goals. And that ties into another behavioral science viewpoint research paper that says, when studied, the research found that fewer years of employment at an organization and lower employee satisfaction and loyalty predicted increasingly unsafe behavior in the simulation. This suggests that newer and unsatisfied employees are the most vulnerable to phishing attempts. The takeaway from this is ultimately not only is what we're doing not helping, but in many cases, the way we are going about phishing training now actually structurally harms the really foundation of what we should be having as a security infrastructure and security culture at our companies. This all boils down as a great example to the weakest link. One of the most common metaphors that we use in our industry, one that is horribly flawed, one that is not accurate, but one that also scapegoats the people with the actual responsibility for security training. These are all exact quotes from specifically the Uber hack that happened a couple of years ago. And all that is, humans are the weakest link, humans are the weakest link, humans are the weakest link, and pointing to a single point of failure as a single person. Just a quick anatomy of the Uber hack shows that 7 months before the attack, Uber ignored a vulnerability disclosure. Then, attackers used prompt bombing and MFA fatigue to socially engineer one of their employees. They used his existing VPN to access the internet, but the internet was overprivileged and not subdivided by group, which allowed the attackers to do lateral movement, which set off no alarms whatsoever. The attackers were then able to find an open file with PowerShell scripts, and these scripts had admin credentials that were all stored in plain text. And these credentials were then enabled the attacker to compromise Uber's Duo, OneLogin, AWS, and G Suite environment. This was not a weakest link. This is not a single person, one person did something wrong. And if a single social engineering attack can take down your entire organization, it is not that one person's fault. It is ultimately our fault as security people. A lot of the rhetoric and the way we think about this in security comes from Bruce Schneier's book, Secrets and Lies, where he says that people often represent the weakest link in the security chain and are chronically responsible for the failures of security systems. To the best of my knowledge, Bruce no longer believes this, but it sounded good 23 years ago. In the same book, a couple pages later, is a part that most people ignore, which is, Bruce says, the security of a system may be no better than its weakest link, but that generally refers to the individual technologies. In a smart system, these technologies can be layered in depth, and the overall security is the sum of the links. This is a much more rational way to view what our goals are in terms of security. Now, this gets us to an idea of, how do people actually learn? And how do people, what can we look at in terms of other science that can tell us how to better train our employees and how to better structure our entire organizations to get the goals we want, which is simply a safer organization. Right now, I will take one shiny American dollar and give it to anyone that can go into the parking lot and pick up my car. It's a black Toyota pickup. I think 3 spots over, I can give you a map. I'll wait if anyone wants to volunteer. Don't see any volunteers. Problem is, maybe you don't know how to pick up a car. So let me give you a little, and I will educate you. Lift with your knees, not your back. Maybe you need motivation. Maybe I can make a funny video for you showing you how to pick up my car. Would that help you? And would that help anyone in this room? It would not. Why? Because it's biologically impossible. You know what else is biologically impossible? Trying to beat a computer at passwords. Trying to actually remember complex passwords in a way that would enable us to somehow beat the ever-increasing speed and complexity that computers, forget even quantum, are able to do. Ultimately, human beings have the same capacity kind of mental capacity that we have had for hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years. Computers, on the other hand, are increasing exponentially. Like, there is never going to be a point where we are going to be able to compete with a computer. Yet, this is what we ask our employees to do every day. This is what we have built as a foundation in our industry for decades, that we simply need to add more complexity. We need to somehow beat the computer at a computer's game. That is not going to happen. And ultimately, when you're putting forward these as our structural goals, and you're telling your people in security awareness training, and giving them these rules they need to live by and to do their job effectively, and they cannot be done. They are things that are impossible for your employees to do. A, they just bypass them. B, they lose respect for you as a professional because you're asking them to do stupid and impossible things. And ultimately, it gives you a false sense of confidence in that you think you're doing something when in reality, as the stats show, and as I think our everyday experiences show, we are not getting better. We are not solving the problem. So what can we do? Brief history of research. Kahneman and Tversky, two Jewish researchers. This recently won the Nobel Prize, in case you're interested in following the prizes here. Or unfortunately, unfortunately Tversky had passed away, but this is the foundational study for the study of behavioral economics, which is why it won the Nobel Prize. It ultimately showed in a very simplistic sense that human beings have a much greater value for loss than they do for gain. One of the key examples of this research is they give people a coffee mug, and they ask, how much do you value as the coffee mug? But then when you ask them, well, how much will it take for me to take away the coffee mug? And they typically value the coffee mug at, if I'm taking the coffee mug from you, I maybe think the coffee mug's worth $5. That seems fair. But if you're taking the coffee mug from me, I think that's a $10 coffee mug that you should be giving me $10 for. So in a very simple sense, this provides you with the fact, which should be no surprise to anybody, that human beings are not logical. We are not computers. We have never been computers. We're never going to be computers. That is not what we do. But it also gives us a window into trying to understand how we do think, how we do behave, and the sorts of things we can do to actually use that knowledge to better educate and train our staff. They ultimately put forward a model called bounded rationality, which better reflects the reality of how we think, how we work, and how human beings work. Instead of just a linear, you learn something, it happens kind of model, they ultimately found that there are three inputs: limited knowledge, cognitive capacity, and time limit, that all go into a thing they call bounded rationality, which is, we're not stupid. We're generally highly intelligent people, but as those three inputs will tell you, we are limited by how much education we have, which is one part. We're also limited by how many other things are going on at any given time, and also on time limits. And for anyone that's done a lot of phishing training, you will recognize a lot of those as the keys to effectively getting people to compromise people for phishing training, in that it's much better if they're trying to multitask, if they're not focusing on something, if they're zipping through 100 emails and you're just email number 87. These are all things that ultimately go into why phishing is currently successful as often as it is, but also tells us how we can better communicate to our employees and also to our C-suite and everyone else about how to ultimately make better decisions. So, people aren't logical. Again, should be a no surprise to anybody here. But if they're not logical, how do you get them to do the things you want them to do? How do you actually change behavior? How do we actually solve the problem? Because phishing is probably the biggest security problem that we ultimately have, or phishing and social engineering in general. Now, some of you may have seen BJ Fogg, definitely one of the more prominent researchers. He's out of the University of Stanford. He speaks a lot and has kind of what is kind of one of the better models for understanding behavior change. He is called BMAP, and ultimately there's two axes. One is motivation, one is ability, and then Fogg throws in a prompt. the theory here is that along this line, anything to the right of the curve between the axes will be most likely successful. Anything below the curve will not be successful. And so the standards you have to play with are either to highly motivate people or make things very easy. Ideally, both. If you've done that structurally, then all you need is a prompt. You need something to kind of nudge them to take an action. But that action will not succeed and will not be sustainable if you don't have the conditions met for motivation and ability. The problem is, motivation-wise, they don't care. And they don't care because they're ambivalent about safety and because they want bad things to happen. But most of the people working in your company don't care because that's not their job. That's our job. And if there is a weakest link, if there is a single point of failure, it's us as security professionals, because we are the only people in the company whose job it is to protect the company and to keep everyone secure. Everyone else has jobs to do. I don't know how to run a depreciation table. I don't know how to, there's 100 things in my company that I don't know how to do, and it doesn't matter because that's not my job. You're ultimately trying to get a little bit of attention span from your employees to focus on something that honestly in the long run makes their job harder, to some degree. And they need to not only understand that it's something you want them to do, they need to be able to internalize why they're doing it and be a partner with you in solving this problem, and not just someone you pull every 3 to 6 months, you pull aside, give them a 30-minute session of training, and then send them off into the world again, and then 4 months later when they get a phishing test and they fail it, they get punished for it. That is not an effective way, and it's not an effective way of actually solving the phishing problem, but it's also not an effective way of building culture. And without culture and without trust, as the research papers I first pointed out, it's the employees that have the greatest level of dissatisfaction that are ultimately the weakest, because you have not equipped them with a way of actually solving their problem. They don't trust you. They might not even like you, because a lot of what you're doing seems to be very much like just provoking them or setting them up for failure. So on that level, the use of motivation here, and it's one thing Fogg points out in his research, is that all of the axes here, all the points are not equal points. Ability and motivation are not actually equal when you're looking to put together training for people to change behavior. Again, motivation really is the weakest of all of those points. Ability is absolutely the strongest point. And that comes back to our job of putting together a system and putting together a structure that is easy for people, that makes them successful at doing it, not giving them things like passwords that are ultimately biologically impossible. So Fogg clarifies, if you want to take the reality of human nature and human psychology into account, it means that you can't rely on high levels of motivation. There are only two ways to change your behavior in the long run. It's small steps approach, and it's redesigning your environment. And again, weakest link, that's us, because it's the redefining the environment that is the most important part of this equation. Is putting together a system, putting together training, putting together a culture that allows people to be successful. Also, another set of research on nudges that perhaps a lot of you have heard of, often very prominent in the news. Very similar sets of behavioral science research. Ultimately comes to a lot of the very same conclusions, but with some slightly different points. But at the end of the day, for nudges, you can't nudge anybody to do anything they don't want to do. That is not how nudges work. That is not what the research says. Nudges are for people that have already bought in that the thing they're doing is important. Now they just want to do it. They want the most effective way to do it. They're looking at you to guide them in terms of what is going to be successful in getting that done. But if you miss the first part, if you miss the culture part, if you miss the part where you guys are partners and not adversaries in the situation, then you have completely missed the exercise and you will never be successful in the system we have right now. So Thaler puts forward there's ultimately 7 stages to nudges. I think I'm going to read this quickly. While I read them, think to yourself within your own organizations, how many of these steps do you actually incorporate? And even if it's not this exact pattern and the exact numbers, how many of them are actually in any way even part of how you're designing your security awareness training programs, how you're designing your outreach to your employees? First of all, defining your changes clearly. Secondly, consider the change from the perspective of your employees, not simply what we want them to do, but what they need to do in context of what their work is. What is their workflow? What is their position? What is their role? And then designing from that point of view. Third, use evidence to show the best chance of success. Treating them again like equals. Don't dictate to them what needs to be done, but actually work with them for kind of shared success. Next, present change as an option. Again, if people do not accept the need for the change, if they do not buy in, then none of the rest of it will be effective. You need to give them the option and let them come to the conclusion that this is something that they want to do. Next, listen to feedback. A lot of times you can do the first couple steps and all in good faith, you can try and listen to people. But again, once you actually institute a lot of these policies, you need to have a feedback loop that tells you as people actually implement the stuff in their job roles, like what is successful, what is not successful, and be able to iterate and fix and make your program better. The next one is restrict obstacles. And this goes back again, make it easy. Motivation will never be successful by itself. You will never be able to motivate your employees to be so motivated, to be as motivated as you are, or more motivated than you are to get these things done if you have not made it easy, if you have not taken away all the obstacles, if you have not made it the right thing to be the easy thing to do. And then you need to maintain momentum with short-term wins. Again, this is all part of a feedback loop with them as well. As you go forward, and I think this fits into the listen to the feedback as well. As you go forward, again, you're a team. When things are good, everyone needs high fives. They need to understand what is working, what is not working, and when they do good things, you need to have a system in place where you can reward their good behavior so that they appreciate what it is that everyone collectively is doing. Okay, so now we have a little bit of foundation for what is successful foundationally for putting together a program where you can work with your employees and set together a system that will build your culture and ultimately lead to better protection for your employees and your company. Now, in terms of the kind of more nuts and bolts of how you communicate with your employees, this is one of my favorite bits of psychology from teaching. This is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. It's also my beard inspiration. So one day, maybe a couple years from now, I'll be able to compete with the good doctor. This ultimately highlights, and I think you could take away all the text and just rephrase this as, this is modern phishing training. This is what we're doing right now. Once a year, we bring people into a room, and we sit them down for half an hour, maybe we don't sit them in a room at all anymore. Maybe they just sit in front of their screen and download whatever module you've assigned to them. They finish it, they do a check the box assessment, and then you say, see you again next year. Maybe it's next quarter, if you're a really crazy company that does every 3 months. But ultimately, this tells you psychologically that within an hour of going through this training, people have lost a majority of the details of what you have just told them. The research only says that you should be doing, after a presentation, an hour later, do a recap. Then a day later, do another recap. Then a week later, doing another recap. If you do that, if you have repetition built into your training, then you have the ability to ultimately reinforce what you're trying to get people to understand. If you don't do that, and I can probably say I've almost never seen this in the industry in terms of this sort of reinforcement of repetition of data. Then you get exactly what the curve says, which is people remember stuff for just barely long enough to answer the multiple choice question, and then they move on to other things because they've got other stuff to do. So combating this and understanding that a lot of it is, it's not a bulk of information all at once. It's ultimately small pieces in repetition and with kind of in a system that'll get people to actually retain the things you're trying to teach them. Also, people are not all the same. Again, not a big surprise. There's what's called the VARK model. It ultimately highlights how different people learn. So in addition to having some sort of redundancy and repetition to the content you're teaching your employees, you also need to understand that you need to have it in different formats. Some people are auditory learners. Some people are visual learners. Some people, like, reading and writing is what better reinforces the ideas. Personally, I'm a very kinesthetic learner. I like to do things. I like to dive in, get a bunch of stuff wrong, fix it all. That helps me understand complex learning. But everyone is different. And if you're the one who's in charge of designing the programs for your company, you should also be making sure that all the content you want your employees to understand is available in multiple formats, ideally interlocking with each other, because oftentimes people won't have a single mode that is that's the only way they learn. It's an interaction of all of them. But again, this is something that if you are in almost any other industry, and certainly if you're in the education industry, if you're in psychology or behavioral science, you would not ever consider building an education program that didn't incorporate multiple modes of learning, but it's something in our industry we never even think about. I've seen a small handful of programs that actually take this into account, but ultimately very few. And a lot of it is because we're not educators. Most people in this room don't have degrees in education or psychology or behavioral science or anything like that. You have very wonderful degrees in engineering and other things. It's also one of the reasons, as an aside, why we should be very welcoming of people from outside the industry coming into security, because a lot of times they're adding skill sets like this that are not naturally present in our industry. Also, a big point, and this goes back to BJ Fogg's idea of a prompt. It also goes back to the idea of context. And I was a lifeguard in high school. Got to carry around one of these life preservers all day long. If you were drowning and I threw this to you, it was amazingly helpful. You were really appreciative of me having this tool for you at that moment. If I had one of these right now and I just threw it at your head in the audience, not so happy. Context matters and relevance matters. Going back to what we do in the industry right now, again, once a year we sit down and go through a list of things that sometime in the next year, these 10 things may happen to you in your work. Here's what we want you to do about them, and then we let people go. None of those things are actually relevant to them at the time, and then 6 months later, when it maybe is relevant at the time, they've already forgotten it. So building systems, and this one's actually much harder to do, because you don't know exactly when those prompts are going to be. You don't know when those phishing emails are going to come in. You don't know when they're going to get, people are going to try and social engineer them. You don't know when a lot of the other security issues are going to happen. But it means that you also have to have consistent, relevant contact with your employees to make sure that relevance is part of this. Because simply telling them something at a time where they don't care about it and they don't need the information is a waste of resources, and ultimately doesn't get you anything. It doesn't get you any level of success. So one of the fun or frustrating things about moving to the industry when I did is that I had a chance to actually see what some other industries have done and still do to this day to train employees for risk and train them for safety. And things that are very intuitive and very successful in other industries are things that are completely ignored in security. One of the easiest industries to point to is airlines and air safety. I'll read a relatively long quote, but I think it's worth the review. This is the former chairman for Flybe Airlines in the UK. It says, "The focus on aviation risk management is not on blaming people. It's on developing processes that deliver safe performance and a culture where people understand what the risks are, and if there are issues, are prepared to investigate, look at them, and have a just culture. Aviation says something to go wrong, says for something to go wrong, maybe a dozen other things must have failed because we make sure that there are barriers to risks becoming events. This should be, again, totally a different industry, very obvious relevance to where we are right now. Like, this is the opposite of what the weakest link mentality is. This is saying that there can't be, that we have built in so many layers of protection that even if we're looking at that very last step in the chain, that maybe like was the last causal event, so many things had to fail before then, that our job is to fix the system, to fix the redundancy, and to fix the entire chain, not just scapegoat a single person at the end of that chain. It also points out that as a culture, this is a culture of non-blame, and a culture where like people are not called out for like small mistakes, because ultimately it's the culture that needs to be successful for your training to be successful. Now, I don't actually fully expect you to see all the numbers here; they're very small. But the charts on the left are the airline industry. Charts on the right are us. So over the last 40 years, fatal accidents per million flights and fatalities per trillion, I think it's round trip passengers carried or something close to that. You can see a very clear, like very strong downward projection in the airline industry for safety. They have gotten consistently way more and more safe, and even as you can see on the other axes, as the number of flights have gone up and as the number of people in the air have gone up, the actual deaths and the actual safety issues have actually gone down. Like, that is what you should see with an appropriate safety culture, and that is what you should see where you have a system built in place that actually prioritizes like structural safety and not simply like yearly one-off training. On the other hand, you see our industry where we spend more and more time and more money on cybersecurity training, on security awareness training, and our numbers have gone nothing but up. And these numbers actually only end at 2019, so that doesn't even take into account the more recent challenges we've had with COVID and with work from home and other things. But you clearly see that like what we're doing is not working. And again, it is the frustrating part of doing training in the industry that it has not really ever worked. It has been decades since since a lot of the things we're doing now have tried and failed, and we did them again and they failed, and we did them again and they failed, and they keep on failing greater, and we're still doing the same things. It's another example. There's a human resources company called PIN out of Australia. It's a partnership between the former manager of people at Atlassian and the former manager of HR for a company called SignalAmp that did HR. They ultimately saw a lot of the similar failings in HR and formed this company. Like, one of the hallmarks of this company is, and this is kind of their mission statement, that every employee's journey is different. It said, we believe that every single message that is sent to an employee speaks to the personal circumstances and context of that individual. The takeaway for this is ultimately the relevance, going back to the life preserver. They have built a system in HR where instead of having HR training once a year, where they would sit people down and just give them a big catalog and say, here's all the stuff you need to know about HR, they have built up a system where, like, you're working at your job, you get promoted to manager. That's a trigger moment. Now they know, great, you now need to know processes for being a manager. You need to know how to deal with people, promotions, vacation time, whatever it is in your organization. But they have built in a system within their within the HR management systems to find all those triggers, to find whenever it is, like, when do you need that information, and giving you that information at that point, and not before, not after, but actually at the point where you need it. And they've had enormous success with relevancy. Because ultimately, 6 months before you were a manager, you didn't need any of that information, but now you do. And if they can build a system like that, based on human resources and based on management, like that is something we can easily do given the technology and the capability and resources we have in our country, in our industry. And then I recently found one other example within our industry, which I don't have a final slide for. I was trying to keep this relatively vendor neutral, especially as far as security goes. But there's a company in the UK called Think Cyber. That actually, I will say, I've never used the product, so like I can't claim what I don't have much knowledge of that. But they are built on a foundation of the principles we're talking about like today. And they have read all the research we've talked about, as well as a lot of other research, and they have actually built a specific security product based on that. And so they have a product where things are communicated to people in ways they understand, and they also communicate like security risk as it happens in real time. So they have a system that's integrated, like as an example, into your email system, where you get an email from someone that you've never seen before that isn't in your email list, and there's a link in that email that you don't know the safety of. When you go to hover over that link with your mouse, their system pops up and says, "Hey, do you know this person? Do you want to click that link? And just double check." It doesn't really stop them from doing anything, but it gives them an actual real-time check that causes them to stop and think about what they're doing, as opposed to, again, what they're most likely doing otherwise, which we all do, is reading 100 emails at the same time and trying to multitask with a bunch of other tasks. So there are real-world ways that we can be integrating a lot of these lessons into our actual security programs. So to wrap up, like, how do we become unphishable? First of all, like, stop doing it badly, and also stop using it as a metric for success. If there is a single point of failure in all of this, it's ultimately us as security teams. We are the one group in any organization that has the power to fix things, has the knowledge to fix things, has the motivation to fix things. If things aren't running well or don't get fixed, it's our fault. So internalizing that, and then looking at our relationship with our employees as partnerships, and ultimately building a system where we can better understand how people actually work, don't require them to do things that are biologically impossible, communicate them in a peer-to-peer fashion in a way that gives them relevant information when they need it, and then reinforces that over a period of time. Those are ultimately the steps that we can do right now to have a fundamental change in our security awareness training and the capability of our employees to make better safety decisions more consistently. Are there any questions? Are we doing questions? Well, great. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah. Thank you very much for coming, Liam.
Well, Brendan is really the first speaker that I've seen bridging the economy, psychology, and cybersecurity. By the way, the book he mentioned is Thinking Fast and Slow. You should check it out.
Great book.
Yeah. Thank you. Excellent talk.
A little under time today. Yeah, I only got signed up for this last week.
I know, because that's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Was it Joshua?
Yeah.
What do you teach?
Most of my teaching was actually in the wine industry.
Wine?
I was a winemaker for many, many years before
Really?
and then got very, very bored of doing that and went back to school for computer science and then got into security. But I spent, 15, 20 years doing med education. But yeah,
Are you still doing it on the side? Or is
I did. I got really burned out. In California, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
What's your focus area in cybersecurity?
IT security audits and penetration testing. Yeah.
So like assessment?
Yeah, assessments. Yeah.
Risk management.
Yeah, some compliance, but definitely risk management. then I'll pick up the phone and call one of their employees and phish them and say, oh hey, this is Tim from IT. Yeah, can I get your password? And they'll just give it to me. And it's like, great, why have these great walls? Why have this great security structure if I can just walk around it?
I share the same thought. I have the same frustration. She always told me, I think we should break down. Maybe we can present together. I'm first
Do you know what Evan looks like, the next speaker? Nobody's seen him yet.
Oh yeah, you can make an announcement like this because they all have the.
Yep. Hey, no big deal. How was the last speech?
It was great. He's good. And he's I mean, he's from the academic background. So he talks a lot about some stuff, economy. He's the first person I've seen preach cybersecurity, economics, and psychology. And he also referred a few books I like a lot. Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman. Yeah,
Okay.
it's awesome. Really like it. Ev, did you say Ev?
Yeah, it's Evan.
Maybe I should.
I have somebody in the green room waiting. Looks like track 2 wrapped up. Let's see if I see him.
You Evan?
Yep.
Angus Chen.
Nice to meet
Pleasure
you.
to meet you. I'm your